George M. Roberts by Savannah Berry and Emerson Brown. George M. Roberts was born on December 15, 1947. He was born in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Mr. Roberts' father served as a major in the United States Army for 32 years. During World War II, his father also spent 32 years in the United States military and fought in World War I.
George Roberts grew up on a small farm at.
So we had to make our own fun, going down to the lake and swimming and trying to basically grow up and have fun doing it.
Happy childhood. He enjoyed going down to the lake to swim as a child. Mr. Roberts attended New Brunswick Senior High School. After high school, he went to college at Pennsylvania Military College, which was founded in 1821. While at college, Mr. Roberts wore a uniform every day, which is almost identical to the uniform at West Point, the only difference being that the uniform at Pennsylvania Military College has black embroidery on the side, since it was originally a cavalry school. After Miss George Roberts graduated from Pennsylvania Military College, he went through summer camp training at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania, and after he graduated from there, he was commissioned to second lieutenant in the United States Army as an infantry officer. The first assignment Mr. Roberts was given was to go to an officer's basic course in Fort Benning, Georgia.
During high school, Mr. Roberts did track. He ran the quarter mile and threw the javelin. There were not many options when he attended high school, and since he had a lot of chores as a child, it fit into his schedule.
George Roberts went to Fort Indiantown Gap during the summer of 1969, where he experienced classes in basic training format, such as marksmanship courses, map training, and so on. After that, Mr. Roberts was commissioned to Fort Benning, as mentioned before, and he experienced basic training again, but in a more advanced setting. Once he graduated from the basic course at Fort Benning, Mr. Roberts went into airborne training at the same location. After finishing airborne training, George Roberts relocated to Fort Knox in Kentucky, which was an armor school at the time, and there he enrolled in maintenance courses to learn how to take care of heavy equipment. Then, Mr. Roberts was given the assignment of going to Berlin, Germany.
Mr. Roberts stayed in Berlin for a year, visiting countries like Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and so on. At this time, his wife, Cindy, was pregnant with their first child, Sherry. While in Germany, George Roberts was given the orders to go into Vietnam.
George Roberts' first thoughts going into war were he didn't want to become a fatality, because at the time his wife had a child named Sherry. He didn't want to leave his wife and child without a father, but he already made a commitment to the Army, and he went to military school, so he knew he eventually would be going to war.
Mr. Roberts went to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, also called IOBC, Infantry Officer Basic Course, Home of Infantry. That was the only thing taught there. Every day the men got up at 5:30 a.m. and went through training on how to survive in combat, how to be an officer, and how to be a leader. And he did that until he graduated.
George Roberts liked the training he went through. The training was physically demanding, and during airborne training, the men ran 5 miles every morning. Once he signed up to be an airborne candidate, he was required to pass a test. A part of the test was he had to run in formation of 40 people a mile in 7 minutes or less, in full fatigue with combat boots, and only his jacket off. Therefore, he had to be in very good physical condition. In basic training, he didn't get a lot of sleep, and he did a lot of running. He learned to survive in a structured environment that may become chaotic at any time, and he had to know how to keep himself under control for safety of others in times of chaos. Mr. Roberts' basic training lasted about 9 weeks.
George Roberts went to airborne training in Fort Benning for a 3-week course, and after that he went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for a 4-week course. Then he went to Berlin where he was stationed. Mr. Roberts was assigned to go to Berlin, Germany. That was when the Berlin Wall was still up. To fly to a country like Berlin at that time was 110 miles behind the communist lines. This was a very chilling thought for him. At the time, Berlin was split into different sectors, and in order to pass into different sectors, a person had to pass through checkpoints that were highly guarded, not allowing anybody who was from a different sector to pass through. Mr. Roberts told a story about how during 1970, while at the restaurant in East Germany, soon after the Apollo mission, a waiter was clicking his heels and almost bowing to Mr. Roberts, saying congratulations. He felt these people were no different than him. but they did not have the privileges of freedom. The wall was set up separating families that may never see each other again. Mr. Roberts was very pleased when the Berlin Wall came down under President Reagan's administration.
Mr. Roberts shared another story with us about when Adolf Hitler was dead, but Rudolf Hess was still alive. He was a deputy Führer. He was the second in command under Adolf Hitler. Rudolf Hess flew a plane into British airspace. The plane crashed, and a farmer took him prisoner around 1942-1943. George Roberts was an officer of the Guard, and he guarded Rudolf Hess while he was in prison during the war.
At the time that I went to Berlin in 1970, Rudolf Hess was in a prison in Berlin called Spandau Prison, okay? I was the officer of the Guard there and guarded Rudolf Hess, the Deputy Führer of the Third Reich, 2 separate occasions. And actually, I mean, I saw him as close as I am to your window right there. And we were told, obviously, don't talk to him. He would walk up and down in a very military posture, a really scary looking guy. And if you talk to him, he would report you that, you know, somebody tried to talk to him. But just to be able to say that you were that close to and guarded and kept out of the population of the world, the Deputy Führer of the Third Reich, it was incredible.
Mr. Roberts did feel that he was prepared to go to war. He went to military college for 4 years under military contract, and you don't go to military school if you're not planning on going into the military. Plus the fact that George Roberts was an infantry officer, he knew that if the Vietnam War was on, which it was, he needed to be prepared to go into war. Mr. Roberts had a roommate who was on the Washington Wall in D.C. Because he was killed in the training accident on his way to Vietnam, Mr. Roberts also stated that you are as mentally prepared as you could possibly be, and that's all that you could do.
George Roberts shared a story with us.
There's another story I could tell about having been in Berlin. One day I was coming back to the complex, and the Russians in Berlin, because you're behind Soviet lines, they have what they call mission signs. And a mission sign says, you stay on this side and don't go on that side because there's information on that side we don't want you to see. So around our area, there were mission signs. And I came back this one day driving my Buick Grand Sport, which I had shipped over to Germany when I went over there, and I see this Volga, that's spelled V-O-L-G-A, Volga, which is a Russian-made car. And I knew it was a Volga as soon as I saw it, and it was in our quadrangle, which is like a big paved parade area. And I drove down as quickly as I possibly could to get a quick look inside the car, and sure enough, there was a Soviet major in uniform in the back seat, and they were trying to take pictures. And I was fortunate enough to use my car to run him into the curb, to run their car into the curb. And at the point that he got into the curb and they tried to put it in reverse, the MPs from McNair Barracks, which was where all the MPs were kept, they came and got up behind him. And I can only tell you that that Soviet major had to be sweating bullets, because to be caught in West Germany behind mission signs wearing a Soviet uniform could not have been a pleasant experience for him. So that was, so you know, I mean, like you're asking, was I prepared? Yes, because of all the experiences that I had and the things that I learned and the feelings that I had about being as good as I could be at what I was doing prepared me as well as they could prepare me. So yes, I was ready to go.
George Roberts assured us he was very prepared to go to Germany. He learned everything he needed to know and to be prepared to war.
George Roberts was transported to Da Nang on Pan Am Airlines, which is no longer in business. He left from California and flew to Hawaii, then from Hawaii to Vietnam. He flew in Ben Ho Airport. Mr. Roberts' first thoughts were how it was so hot and why does it smell so bad. He learned that in Vietnam there is no septic or sewage systems there. Mr. Roberts was taken to Saigon when he got there, and once in Saigon he was assigned to be placed into Red Beach. He was stationed there until the 1st Aviation Brigade, 142nd Transportation Battle Line relocated to Da Nang, which was the primary tactical air support at this time. The 142nd Brigade did the most maintenance to helicopters. Mr. Roberts said that the night before he was scheduled to leave, they were being mortared and he was in a bomb shelter with no roof, but you had to do what you had to do. George Roberts told us that he made many friends, and he continues to keep in touch with many of the men, such as a man named Jim Little.
During 1971 and 1972, the president was trying to get as many troops out of the war as he could due to the fact that this war was very unpopular with the American public. At this time, Mr. George Roberts was running the Keystone Aviation Processing Point, while other units were standing down or leaving the country, and many units had equipment that needed to be processed. At this time, George Roberts had Vietnamese carpenters working for him to help to process equipment that was being returned to them because it was destroyed, or to determine if it was ready for service. The equipment would either be processed or transported somewhere else in the country.
When Mr. Roberts was stationed in Da Nang, he remembered seeing one of the same ships in service that he saw when he was in Germany about 30 years earlier. He said that its name was the USS Upshur and was no longer used to transport personnel, but equipment instead. Mr. Roberts was very fascinated by this event, and it greatly reminded him of his family waiting for him at home. However, he knew he had to do a duty in Vietnam, and he had to finish it before he was able to return home.
Mr. Roberts, like stated before, was first lieutenant of the Aviation Brigade. There he enjoyed and was content with his duty. Mr. Roberts deeply expressed on how he was very fortunate and lucky to be there where he was during the time of war. He stated, I certainly didn't have it as bad as some guys in Vietnam had. Mr. Roberts explained that he was not stationed in the jungle and muck, which is what one typically sees on TV. He said they were often shot at, but their complex was so big that they never worried or had any doubt that they couldn't handle what was being forced out of them. I actually got a chance to go up in the helicopter, and the pilot said, "Take the cycling," which is what you used to fly, and I got a chance to fly a helicopter. It was the experience of a lifetime. Mr. Roberts reminisced on all the memorable experiences he had while in Vietnam. He remembered that rats being as big as small dogs, and he had said mosquitoes were the size of helicopters. He never once took doubt that he wouldn't make it home. All the hardships would eventually pay off.
Mr. Roberts stated that he never really experienced many casualties because he was not in the main battle line. He did remember the first man killed from his hometown, named Richie Ashkevitz, who was a former friend he graduated with. Mr. Roberts realized that the hardest part was losing those close to you and seeing all these people you knew gone. This was just another reason why he felt lucky to be in the position he was. Mr. Roberts never was sick or injured during the war. He also described the different types of machinery that he used and located at his complex. They used special helicopters called Chinooks that were quieter than others when taking off. On a specific Chinook helicopter Mr. Roberts came into contact, it was called the Puff the Magic Dragon. That was a beast on the battle line. He also talked about how he could tell the difference between guns by the sound of the noises that they made, like a tat-tat-tat or a hum. Mr. Roberts was well educated and knew his duty like the back of his palm.
Even though Mr. Roberts did not earn any medals during the war, he received high ranking in the infantry training while at college. He also received his Vietnam ribbon for participation in the war. He told of how he knew he had a duty to do, and it was to be done no matter what the cost. Mr. Roberts did not fear war or run away from it like other men may have done. He was proud and honored to be fighting for his country. That was the greatest achievement he could have ever received.
This veteran was clearly aware of what he was fighting for when growing up in a military family. However, with the Vietnam War, he felt that he was there because he was supposed to be, not because there was a reason. He told us a story of how before he arrived, a Vietnamese farmer was making $50 on a rice crop. When the Americans left, the crop was still worth the same. Not much was accomplished at the risk of others' lives during this war. During the American During the war, Americans got wrapped up in politics and not much could be done about it. But Mr. Roberts stated, "So that's just the way it works." The war changed Mr. Roberts' view on not only the war, but his life as well.
Writing to his wife every day was a sign of how much he really did miss home and his family. They did not have phones, Skype, texting, or any other technology like we do today to keep in touch. He made 1 or 2 phone calls to his wife his whole entire service. When Mr. Roberts was in Vietnam, he realized there was so much more to life and to live for, and he took pride in serving, but it wouldn't be his duty for life.
There was a huge culture shock for Mr. Roberts to adjust to compared to America. When he first got off the plane, it smelled horrible and the sewage was layered in the streets, streams, and near crops. Their babies ran around naked because there was no money to spend on necessities. While in Vietnam, Mr. Roberts ate an iguana boa constrictor, but he swears it just tasted like chicken. They did not have Coca-Cola and burgers. They got rations and betel nut. His favorite was the packages that were sent over from Philadelphia containing tasty cakes and other American foods, but it was very rare.
Despite the hardships, Mr. Roberts was one of the reasons why the country had freedom and has the reputation it does. He served as a protector for us, and we are greatly appreciative of him. We should always remember the brave men that sacrificed their life for a better living. Mr. Roberts' story is a symbol of that American history, and we are thankful that he shared it with us.